I was so proud of you when you did that. It was amazing. Just, you have an amazing character. I pulled over and threw up when you cried. I was listening to the radio. It was so hard to hear.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, sorry for laughing, but him saying that he threw up when she was speaking and her asking about that is pretty funny.
I pulled over and threw up when she cried. I was listening to the radio. It was so hard to hear. But it was just so amazing.
If Scott Peterson had been feeling cautiously confident during the first month after Laci's disappearance, and some of that shady confidence is evident in Amber's secret recordings of their phone conversations, well, all of that changed on January 23rd, 2003. That was the day Amber came forward and broke her silence in front of a gaggle of gobsmacked reporters. Everyone was shocked. Laci's family was shocked to the core. Laci's friends couldn't believe what they were hearing. And these shockwaves clearly had an impact on Scott himself, who felt exposed and who suddenly realized he needed the media to do damage control.
Sauron's wrath will be terrible, his retribution swift.
Scott Sauron did respond swiftly, and the response to his disastrous interviews was terrible. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Welcome to the many of you who have subscribed. If you are really into this case, you might want to read my book, Blood and Seawater, on this case. It's part of a trilogy. You can read it as a paperback. You can read it on Amazon Kindle. It's also available for those who are on Kindle Unlimited. And then you can also join my Patreon, patreon.com/TCRS, and listen to the audiobook narrated by me. I'll put links to all of those in the description. If you find this analysis worthwhile, please like, share, leave a comment. Look out for the part 2 of Patsy Ramsey. You're not going to want to miss that. And you can also hit the thanks button if you're enjoying this analysis, and let's get started. So if Amber had showed another side to the whole story and to Scott himself, it was now up to Scott to take control of the narrative. He'd done it before, when Amber's friend had told her that he was married. And with a few twists and turns, he'd gotten Amber back on track, hadn't he? Now he just needed to charm the media. How hard could that be?
I had nothing to do with Laci's disappearance.
That is Scott saying exactly the same thing in 4 different interviews. And you can watch it at 44 minutes into the Netflix docuseries, where they juxtapose 4 stock standard Scotts regurgitating the same tired formula. I had nothing to do with Laci's disappearance. Episode 2 of American Murder, Laci Peterson, also presents a brief portfolio of Scott's least believable moments in front of the camera. He has this strange, wheezy, watery, dopey, drowsy effect in all of them, which is Scott's, apparently, his best effort at grief, I guess. It's his best effort at what he thinks is appropriate emotion, but he doesn't even come close. There's an interesting moment when no-nonsense Gloria Gomez, I think she's from CBS News, who is hot on Scott's murderous psychological trail by now, interrogates Scott in the interview, and his eyes blacken, and he warns her to choose her words carefully. Somewhere in that interview, she comes up with this spectacular nugget.
Tell me what you love about Laci.
God, what? No. I think you can sum it up pretty easily with looking at her photograph. The photograph for a big smile in the press.
It just seemed so disconnected.
And I think that is 100% accurate, because what had happened with Scott is he had disconnected, and now on camera he's supposed to reconnect. He's supposed to show reconnected emotions, and he just can't do that. And so when he's asked, tell me what you love about Laci, Scott is dumbfounded by this. And all he can end up doing is eventually thinking about a photo of Laci. In order for Scott to do what he did, he had to create an emotional distance between himself and Laci and Connor, and he succeeded. We saw exactly the same thing in the Chris Watts case, and he succeeded. Laci felt it so keenly, she mentioned it to her mother. Shanann felt it too, and mentioned it to those close to her as well. So if there's anything we learn from this case is when a man starts to show a emotional distancing, but it starts to become quite serious and quite consistent, and it goes on for quite a long time, and there's not really a good reason for it, you might want to pay a little bit of attention to it. You might want to think critically and try to see what's really going on. What I think is easy to miss is likely the spiel isn't just that Scott has lost feelings of affection and connection to his wife and unborn child because Amber was wrapped up in his motive, because his emotions have transferred to her, but initially he feels he can't really afford to even pretend to show emotions because his feelings are constantly betraying him, and he committed murder in a real sense because of these strong feelings. So it feels like second nature to hide them. And so in his mind, his best bet is to show no feeling. And so when he's on camera, how does he suddenly sort of draw these feelings to the surface when he's been so guarded about them, when he's needed to be so guarded about them as well? Now, when it turns out showing his feelings is what he needs to do, he's got to show himself to be a grieving husband, especially in the context that he has a mistress. Does he know how? Well, he's out of practice, because not only has he lost those feelings, in the process of doing what he did, he has destroyed what was for him a nightmare threatening his fairy tale. And if anything, what he's feeling is relief and impatience to get on with his fairy tale. So there's no love lost there, which is why it's so hard and counterintuitive for him to try to summon them back to the surface. Does that make sense? By the way, can you think of another criminal or suspect who, when they were asked to think of their best memories of a victim, they were only able to think of a photograph? Can you think of anyone?
After my Scott Peterson interview, there was no doubt in my mind Scott had killed Laci.
It's also interesting how the detective watching one of the interviews could tell immediately that when Scott said on national television that he told the detective about Amber on Christmas Eve, he knew it was a lie.
Told the police immediately.
When?
That was the first night we were together. The police, I spent with the police.
You told them about her?
Yeah, from December 24th on.
Well, that was a lie.
Now, it's quite interesting looking at Scott's face when he tells that lie, when he tells Diane Sawyer on national television that he told the detective on Christmas Eve that he was having an affair, that Amber was part of the whole thing. And you can actually see the thing we've spoken about so often in the Chris Watts case, the shut eyelids, the long blink, the looking down. And at one point, he's struggling so much to keep a straight face, he kind of closes one eye and opens the other. It's a really strange look. But what is happening is he's trying very hard to tell a lie while maintaining what he thinks is a reasonable effect. And of course, he's failing spectacularly. And this brings up, I think, a really interesting question. Why did Scott suck so much at lying? Why did he think that he was a good liar? Why did he think he had the gift of the gab? I think in a certain sense, Scott's job was sales. And so, he was a fertilizer salesman, and one that was also failing spectacularly in the financial sense, but it was really all he knew. And sales is about talking. And Scott seems to think he was good at that. And yet, like Chris Watts, more than once he uses big words that he doesn't seem to understand or didn't seem to know how to use correctly. So I think that's one aspect to it, that he is a kind of a talker, that part of his job and part of his identity is being a bullshitter, right? I also think doting parents played a role. I mean, Scott's family have stood by him for decades now. They have an unshakable faith in their golden boy son, which I think has always given him a sense of entitlement and an irrational confidence in himself that's never really been tested. He's never really had to sort of properly prove himself the way a lot of other kids have to. I think a doting wife and girlfriend also made him think of himself as a wordsmith with the Midas touch. And I think this suggests that Scott spent a great deal of time in a kind of a fictional world. And we know him telling Amber that he was in Paris over New Year's. That provides a little glimpse of the scale of his irrational narcissism and wishful thinking. We also know once upon a time he fancied himself as a professional golf player. And I think fantasy was how he dealt with the real world. Why? Because he didn't know how to deal with the real world. I also think Scott's financial concerns were part of a pressing reality that he couldn't solve. It simply couldn't figure out through strength of mind or character. And so his way out of that was by lying, cheating, and ultimately stealing because of his weakness of character. And what did he steal? Well, he stole Laci's life. He stole her car. He even tried to steal her house. And I think that raises yet another interesting question is, Shanann Watts said that Chris Watts had no game. What do you think about that in terms of Scott Peterson, especially when you see him in front of the camera? Did Scott have no game? I would say he had more game than Chris Watts, but also a staggeringly low amount of game in terms of gaming the cops and trying to outsmart a murder investigation. What do you think? Thank you for listening. Look out for my part 2 on Patsy Ramsey, and I'll see you guys next time.